Biodiversity. It's the variety of life on Earth, and without it, there is no future for the planet. As their natural habitats retreat, animals are being forced to find new places to live. In the fight against climate change, biodiversity is essential. How do we protect and preserve our delicate ecosystem? Welcome to CGTN America's Global Action Initiative 2021, Project Earth. Today we're going to be talking about biodiversity, why it's important and what we can do to save it. We'll be talking to a panel later in the studio on biodiversity, but we begin here at the United States Botanic Garden, a place full of a variety of life forms. To talk more about biodiversity, I'm joined now by Dr. Sahara Moon Chapotin, who is the Executive Director of the United States Botanic Garden. Great to have you with us. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Welcome.
Let's start with looking at all these plants around here. A lot of biodiversity, but what does that mean, biodiversity?
Oh goodness, biodiversity is just the richness of life on this planet, and you can start at the bacteria, fungi, plants, animals, but it's the genes, it's the organisms, it's the communities, and the ecosystems of life on this planet.
It's basically everything, right?
Everything, that's right.
Now, why is it important to us?
So biodiversity fundamentally sustains life on this planet. You think of the plants and how they sustain animals and they sustain humans. Plants themselves rely on animals for dispersal and pollination. Even bacteria are everywhere and are supporting so many processes on life.
So everything's dependent on each other. It's the cycle of life, isn't it?
Exactly.
So let's talk about endangered species. There are so many species which are now under threat. In fact, there's so many that have disappeared altogether. How did they disappear in the first place?
Well, the primary cause is what humans are doing to the planet. It's usually habitat loss. So land is lost to agriculture, to urbanization, to other human uses, so the habitat just no longer supports the plants or the animals in it.
Now we have this cactus here, golden barrel cactus, very impressive looking cactus. It's an endangered species.
Yes, highly endangered, and this is a prime example of a species that is lost to habitat loss.
Now, when a species disappears from the planet, what kind of impact does that have?
Well, it depends on the species, but what's, I think, so alarming is today species are being lost that we don't even know about. They are not known to science. Sometimes they may not be known to anybody. And so plants, I'm thinking about plants in particular, provide us with so many uses: food, medicine, clothing, shelter, pollination services. Animals provide pollination to plants. And so when they're lost and we didn't even know they existed, I can't even tell you what we're losing.
You know, every day we sit down to breakfast, lunch and dinner, but we forget where all that came from.
That's
now, right here, you've got a microcosm of a farm, right?
We do, an urban farm. We are converting so much land to agriculture. And so urban agriculture is a different way of growing food that, especially when it's indoors like this, that isn't converting land and causing habitat loss, which leads to biodiversity loss.
So we're now in a tropical forest. What are we walking through?
So as you see around you, you have plants, you have trees, you have vines. Tropical forests are one of the most biodiverse ecosystems in the world.
And we have wet and dry here.
Yes.
Right. Okay, now if you look at that sort of latitudinal band around the Earth, we'd find the highest number of species in that band.
Very, very rich species diversity throughout the tropics in South America, into Africa, Southeast Asia, and all the way around in the Pacific.
And you've traveled to these areas, right?
Some of them, yes.
Yeah. Which was the most diverse or interesting area that you went to?
Well, you know, I spent a lot of time working in Madagascar, and it's an island. And so islands are particularly diverse because many of the species found on islands are found nowhere else in the world.
We talked earlier on about there being so many species that are disappearing right now. What can be done to stop this slide, to stop plants and other organisms disappearing?
Well, there's some really critical things we can do to stop plants from disappearing. The first is protecting the environment, the habitats that they live in. We need to ensure those are protected, connected with others, and that the people around them are supportive of that protection, that they have a way to earn a living without impacting that natural environment. The second thing we can do, especially for very rare and endangered species, is to ensure that they are also protected in living collections. Like here at the U.S. Botanic Garden, we have plants that are highly endangered. And should anything ever happen to those plants in the wild, we and other botanic gardens have a repository of those plants and can share them and ensure that that plant continues to live.
Right, so there is a plan in place right now.
There are plans in place. We need more. Some of the work we are doing is to fund conservation assessment. So we're actually having teams go out and trying to determine the status of a plant that we know perhaps is endangered, but we don't know how bad it is. And so once we know the status, the conservation status of plants, then we can develop conservation plans.
Dr. Chapperton, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you.
The world fell short. We made insufficient progress towards many of the ambitions we set out for 2020. And in fact, we didn't meet any of the targets and goals in full. Meaningful progress is only made on around 30% of these ambitions. So, for example, we did meet a target to protect 17% of the global land area. But even there, we didn't make progress on making sure that protection was sufficient in quality. So we need to focus on other areas. We need to focus on addressing the underlying drivers of biodiversity loss, sustainable consumption and production, food systems, finance systems. And here systemic changes are needed. And this requires mainstreaming, bringing biodiversity to bear across the whole of government. It really is not a job for environment ministries alone. But we also need to make sure the political will is there and the resources are there for delivering on the ambitious targets. So there's much that needs to be done in the next 10 years that we didn't manage to deliver in the last 10 years. So action to date has really not matched ambition at a global scale, and that must change if we are to secure a future where we live in harmony with nature. But biodiversity needs to be addressed across the whole of government, and that's why we need head of state engagement. So commitments to address in the trade agenda, in agriculture, in finance, and in development planning. And of course, China has much to demonstrate in these areas. So on the restoration agenda, for example, tremendous progress being made in China, with the forest area increasing by over 25% in the last 20 years. China's been doing great work on mainstreaming biodiversity across sectors of government, through the approach of ecological civilization, reaching all parts of government and society. China's providing political leadership. As president of the COP, it's supporting achieving consensus on the negotiations over the coming months, but also demonstrating leadership on the actions which are necessary to deliver on the implementation of what's agreed at the conference. So leadership both for the negotiation process, but also leadership for delivering on its outcomes. So the role of China, the leadership role of China, is critical in that context.
Biodiversity. The term was coined in 1985, a contraction of biological diversity. We've only catalogued about 1.7 million species, but there are likely to be 8 to 9 million, and possibly up to 100 million. But human action is burning this so-called library of life. According to the World Wildlife Fund and the Zoological Society of London, since 1970, planet Earth has lost more than half its wildlife population. Recently, animals like the splendid poison frog and the Jalpa Fallsbrook salamander have been declared extinct, with thousands more species on the brink of disappearing from the planet. And having many species can actually help save the environment. A study from Conservation International showed that nature itself can deliver at least 30% of the emissions reductions needed by 2030 to prevent climate catastrophe. And being green can also mean green. Global sustainable business opportunities from investing in natural resources could be worth $2 to $6 trillion by 2050. To learn more about biodiversity, we're joined now by Professor Thomas Lovejoy, known as the godfather of biodiversity. He's currently a professor of environmental science and policy at George Mason University. Professor, you coined the term biodiversity in the 1980s, and as we've just heard, biodiversity is the variety of life in all its forms and interactions. But much of it is being destroyed and becoming extinct. What is your assessment of the state of biodiversity right now?
So I would say, all the fire alarms are ringing. The rate at which we're destroying habitat around the world, the way we're affecting it with different kinds of human activities and pollution, and finally climate change, which is planetary pollution. It's really rough on biodiversity.
Now, Professor, you've done work in the Amazon rainforest, and you've brought to the world's attention the issue of tropical deforestation. How do you see the Amazon right now?
The Amazon today is basically at a tipping point where there has been enough deforestation that it is beginning to be unable to generate enough rainfall through the trees and the leaves for the southern and eastern part of the Amazon to actually remain as rainforests. So the handwriting is on the wall, and it's really about not just the Amazon and all its biodiversity, it's about the South American climate system, because this contributes moisture as far south as Paraguay and northern Argentina.
Now, as you say, the alarm bells are ringing, but what kind of impact is this loss of species having on the globe in general?
Well, a lot of what you can say in response to that is we simply don't know. We haven't had the opportunity to actually study enough of life on Earth to have a sense of what each one contributes. And, you know, each one is 3.7 billion years in evolution. And basically all of that represents a great living library about the life sciences, which if we had any sense, we would treat much more like a library than as something just to get out of the way.
And can anything be done to reverse this right now?
Absolutely, absolutely. We just need to change our concept of what nature means and embed our aspirations in the natural world. It's not hard to do at all. And I think one important element would be to have national natural asset income accounts, because there's basically only a couple of countries that track what they do with their natural assets.
There is a program underway right now, sponsored by the United Nations, which is known commonly as the 30 by 30 program, which is saving 30% of natural resources by the year 2030. Is that enough?
So there are a number of us, and in the end, I am one of those who think that is not enough. But we can't think simplistically about this as, you know, 30% of the planet where there are no people and 70% where people can do what they want. We need to think about intermediate situations in which people live in reasonable harmony with nature, like indigenous peoples, and new models that we haven't thought of that go beyond national parks.
Professor Lovejoy, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
To discuss more on what can be done to save species around the world, let's bring in our panel. From San Francisco, Leila Salazar-Lopez is the Executive Director of Amazon Watch, and Jinfeng Zhou is the Secretary General of China Biodiversity Conservation and Green Development Foundation. He joins us from Beijing. Thanks to both of you for being with us. Leila, if we look at climate change, it is changing ecosystems, and in turn that forces species to find new habitats. How big an impact is climate change having on our biodiversity?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me today at this critical time for our global biodiversity, our global climate, and really all of humanity. We know that we are in an extinction crisis. We're in a climate crisis. The IPCC has recently declared a code red for humanity if we don't really seriously turn things around. When we say we're in a climate crisis, It's because we are reaching numerous tipping points, including the tipping point in the Amazon, where the rainforest, the Amazon rainforest, can no longer function in the same way that it has for thousands of years. That also affects biodiversity. The changing climate, the changing rainforest, because of all of the threats, affects all of the plant and animal species which are held in the Amazon rainforest, which is about a third, 30% of global plant and animal biodiversity is in the Amazon rainforest.
And Leila, have you found that there has already been a big loss in biodiversity because of climate change? I mean, we've seen what deforestation has done in the Amazon as well.
Yeah, we all probably watched with alarm just 2 years ago when August 2019, we saw the Amazon rainforest ablaze. It's still on fire. Unfortunately, the deforestation, the fire, the burning seasons have gotten more and more intense over the last few years. And it's unfortunate to see not only the fires, but to see the impacts on biodiversity, to see the impacts of these fires on plant and animal life. It's just devastating. It's devastating. And these fires are not accidental fires. They're intentional fires, which are set to make way for agribusiness and other extractive industries, from the Brazilian Amazon all the way to the Western Amazon in Ecuador and Peru. And unfortunately, we have seen a direct impact on biodiversity and also on the peoples, the indigenous peoples, the forest peoples who are protecting those lands, protecting those forests, protecting the life and the biodiversity. The indigenous peoples of the Amazon are already protecting 30% of the Amazon. Around the world, indigenous peoples are protecting about 80% of our global biodiversity. 80% is in indigenous peoples' lands. And so it is crucial at this time, when we're at this time of crisis and really needing solutions, that we look to the indigenous solutions for protecting life, for protecting biodiversity, protecting our forests, our oceans.
Most of the planet's biodiversity is in the tropics. For instance, in just 15 hectares of forest in Borneo, there are 700 species of trees. That's the same amount of the whole of North America. Another area with huge biodiversity, of course, as we've been talking, is the Amazon region. But the rainforest is under threat by economic development. We've sent Paulo Cabral, our reporter, to see what's happening there.
The Amazon is the world's largest rainforest, and it serves a key environmental function in balancing the planet's climate due to its capacity to absorb CO2, carbon dioxide. But there are major fears over its long-term survival, and this road, the BR 319, is, according to environmentalists, a major threat to the region. There is a government project to pave long stretches of this highway, which is still made in large part of dirt roads, which become often impassable during the rainy season. The idea is hailed by farmers, loggers, gold miners and cattle ranchers as an important step in developing this region, while environmentalists see it as a major threat to the rainforest, as it's likely to speed up deforestation along with the rise in economic activity. Brazil has seen a steep rise in deforestation in the Amazon region during the government of Jair Bolsonaro, and while the right-wing president has made promises to protect the rainforest, he has also made clear that bringing economic development to this region is a priority of his government. Paulo Cabral, CGTN, in the Brazilian Amazon.
Jinfeng Zhou, China hosted the COP15 summit on biodiversity last month, and President Xi Jinping, he highlighted the importance of preserving our biodiversity. Can you give us an idea of the commitment that China has towards preserving all these species and preserving our biodiversity?
Yes, thank you. And the China government recently have made many progress, especially fundamentally from the 2015, we have new environmental law. Through that new environmental law, to have NGO to participate in the protection of our environment. And we amended our new wildlife protection law twice since 2016. President Xi announced the donation of 1.5 billion RMB to set up a Kunming Biodiversity Fund to support developing countries' biodiversity. And we also, in China, people's awareness in the participation in biodiversity is very wide. And through this COP15, we put the broadcasting online. We have 490,000 people participate in this COP15. This is the first time we make the COP15 People's COP. Now, we nationwide, we have more protected area, and we have many human-based solution, and that is something happening in China recently.
Leila, there seems to be a clash here, and you've talked about this a moment ago, between those who want economic development, as you pointed out. You know, there are large tracts of the Amazon rainforest that are being destroyed for agriculture, and those who want to preserve the rainforest. But is it possible to strike a balance?
Of course. There's been a balance for most of human history. It's been very recent, actually, that there's been an imbalance. And just to step back a little bit, I do want to say that when we're talking about biodiversity and why it's important, really to simply put it, we're talking about the balance of life. We need biodiversity, just like we need cultural diversity, right, to balance, to have balance in the ecological systems. When a jaguar or a tapir or a spider monkey, these are some of the animals that are under threat right now, that are endangered because of economic development, because of the threats to the Amazon. But when these animals die off, the ecological system, the balance of life is affected, right? Because those jaguars eat other animals. They create a balance in that way. And so there has to be a recognition for what has been done in the past to maintain that balance. It's not just up to indigenous peoples and NGOs and civil society. It is also up to the private sector. And we are seeing governments, some governments, and we are seeing some members of the private sector step up to increase their commitments, increase and improve their policies. We are seeing the financial sector say no more investments for destructive practices or even oil and gas expansion. We need to see the private sector step up more, much more in these ways.
Let's take a look now at a story that captivated the world's attention. A group of elephants migrated over 300 miles in China, and the efforts to avoid human-animal confrontation. No one knows exactly why this group of elephants left their home, a national nature reserve near the border between China and Laos, but millions around the world followed this wildlife journey via a 24-hour live stream. The animals plowed through farms and villages, causing over $1 million in damages. But protecting the elephants is key for China. Since the 90s, the number of wild elephants in the country has doubled. So authorities took all the necessary steps to make sure their trip is a safe one, luring them to natural pathways with food, putting up barriers to prevent them wandering into cities. Some experts believe the elephants were simply lost, didn't know where they were going. But maybe they did. They were really close to Kunming, the Chinese city host to the COP15 on biodiversity. Jinfeng Zhou, as I said, that was a story that captured a lot of people around the world. It's got a lot of viewers around the world watching it. What can you tell us about China's efforts to preserve elephants, and how does it fit into its broader goal of preserving biodiversity?
Yes. Recently, especially these 20 years, the wild elephants in Yunnan province numbers doubled. And that mainly because of the new environmental law and implementation of the law. And that prohibited all, including the ivory trading and including the hunting, illegal hunting, and stopping illegal hunting. That make the number of elephants increased a lot. And because the space, the habitats, existing habitats are isolated and limited space and food, so that is the reason they wandering. But the local government, local authority are trying to let them go, and we suggest to the government to build a national park in Yunnan province and have all the major 4 habitats of elephants get bridged through the ecosystem, and we want extend the elephant habitats to a bigger protected area, and all those are considered, and people are very keen to participate in the protection and try to give enough space and freedom for those wildlife.
Well, Jinfeng Zhou, China is very fortunate in one respect, is that it does have support from the very highest levels of government. I mean, this was President Xi Jinping talking not so long ago. Let's watch it.
人不负青山
If we humanity do not fail nature, nature will not fail us. Ecological civilization represents the historic trend of development of human civilization. Let us join hands, follow the philosophy of ecological civilization, and stand at the height of shouldering our responsibility for future generations, to build a community of all life on Earth together, and a clean and a beautiful world for us all.
So, Jinfeng Zhou, as I say, there is support from the very top, but what else would you like to see being done?
The eco-civilization is very key to solve the biodiversity crisis and as well as the climate emergency, because and all those troubles, emergencies, crises are caused by human. We human we must change our way of life and the way of production. That is the only way to tackle those issues. When I was young, we have 700 million people in China, but now we doubled. We have 1.4 billion people in China. So as in Beijing city, when I was young, there are many natural spaces around the cold part of the city, but now the city expands a lot more. And including the only solution, we should not only protect the nature, but also protect around biodiversity conservation in our neighborhood. That is, all those we can only achieve through the ecological civilization, through the change of way of life. Yes.
Okay, and that's where we have to leave it. Thanks to both of you for being with us. That's all the time we have. We would like to thank our experts and our audience. For more on our GAI content, check out our website at www.globalactioninitiative.com. You'll find full episodes of all our daily shows, exclusive documentaries focused on climate change, speeches and interviews with our VIP guests, and feature stories on everyday heroes fighting to save the planet. And if you're really in a hurry, just scan the QR code with your mobile phone. We hope we've been able to shed some light on what remains one of the most intractable problems of our time.